Hi.
Mimi came highly recommended by one of our master gardeners, Susan Barley Ketchum, who had heard her speak at a program, I believe, last year. So that's how we came across Mimi. And just reading her bio on her website, she's worked with the she's been executive director of the American Herbalist Guild for 10 years. She's mentored students in clinical herbalism and has provided trainings in apothecary management and herbal medicine for many years as well. So we're in for a treat tonight to hear from Mimi about, and I think a lot of her work has been on her own property. I'll let her tell you more about that, but that's kind of my understanding. But I think she's a well-known speaker and recognized as an expert in her field. So, Mimi, I will turn it over to you.
And before we get started, I will say that if anybody has questions, put them in the chat box and we will, if Mimi can.
You're frozen, Casey.
Okay, I was hoping it wasn't me.
Yeah.
That's no surprise with a rainy day, so.
Yeah, and sometimes if she has both her audio and her video going, she gets frozen.
And let me know, I can always turn down my video if I get glitchy. I do live in the country, so sometimes I get glitchy out here. But thank you for that wonderful and warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here with North Carolina plant lovers from Union County. I am in Polk County, North Carolina, which is in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And I've done a lot of work in herbal medicine, a lot of work in nonprofit management. But my passion is native plant sanctuary. And that's pretty much like one of my favorite things to talk about. And for a long time, this class or this work I refer to as Sanctuary Dreamer, because it's been a long time dream of mine to steward a native plant sanctuary. And more recently, I've turned into a sanctuary actualizer because I've come a long way in my efforts and my dreams to steward native plant sanctuary. Specifically, my sanctuary is United Plant Savers Botanical, part of the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary Network. And a lot of what I'll talk about is with regard to applying to become a member of the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary Network. Of course, there's several opportunities to be certified by other organizations, so I might touch base on those as well. And so when I first started touring with this class, like I said, I was a dreamer, but recently this is our son, our 12-year-old son, Talon, holding the sign that we got about 2 months ago. We were approved as a part of the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary Network. And so this was a wonderful endeavor for us here, my fiance, Terry, and you see Talon here standing in what we call Cohosh Cove, in the stand of Black Cohosh, which was really thriving on the property when we got here about 3 years ago. So we are excited. Botanical Sanctuary is a place where refuge and protection, of course, it can be a consecrated or sacred place for worship. We know of these meanings in the sense of plant sanctuary. We're talking about refuge and protection of at-risk plants or medicinal plants or native plants. My sanctuary here is called the Ponderland, and it's more broad than just medicinal herbs. It's actually native plants, just a big category. Native plants is what we are attending to here. And so that involves a lot of different efforts and also projects along the way. United Plant Savers, if you haven't heard of it before, is a nonprofit organization that preserves and conserves and restores native medicinal plant habitats. They established one of their most important initiatives, which is the Botanical Sanctuary Network. And these are sanctuaries around the country, operated, stewarded by a variety of folks and individuals, landowners, communities, to tend to these native plants. And a real important part of their, a real important part of their work is to catalog the plants in the United States that are at risk or critical, or, to watch out for in terms of like, especially geared toward harvesters, foragers, medicine makers, herbalists. No one should be an herbalist without being aware of these plants and which plants to either like protect, steer away from, really consider their sustainability. And so here's an example of what they consider some critical plants that are really highly ranked. I think on this one, I've got Trillium on my property. I wish I had Lady Slipper and False Unicorn, but I don't. I have kind of a little more mesic, sandy soil here. And then there's an array of at-risk plants. All in all, my sanctuary harbors about 22 at-risk and critical United Plant Savers plants. And I'll describe how I came to that determination. And so basically, membership to United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary Network, which by the way, I don't work at, I'm not affiliated with, I'm just a volunteer spreading the good word. But there are some benefits to joining this network. And one is to get that sign, right? Because that sign's pretty groovy. When my application was accepted, I got 3 signs in the mail for my property. You can also be eligible for planting grants and consultation services and listings and newsletters and their website and what have you. And so you can see that there's sanctuaries all around the country, and there's several in North Carolina. That's it. I wonder if I'm on the right presentation. This might be the less North Carolina centric, but that's okay. We'll still talk about North Carolina, because so anyways, you have to be a member of United Plant Savers, and there's a one-time fee to apply for the Botanical Sanctuary application. That's $150. So that's pretty modest, and they do have financial aid for people who have concerns about that. And there's 3 main questions on the application. So part of what I want to do is like walk people through how simple this application is and how, some tips and how I put my application together, and kind of walk people through my process with the application using the Ponderland Native Plant Sanctuary. Now there's 3 questions, but like that first question here is pretty involved. It's like a long question. It talks about providing details of your land and location and maps and photos and time on the land, your existing medicinal plant species, that's an inventory, current conservation projects, and what makes your land special. They also want to see that you offer some sort of educational programming based on your sanctuary. And that would be, there's lots of ideas for this. And by the way, I have just under 4 acres, not a huge plot of land. I have a friend who has like 100 and some acres, and she has a Botanical Sanctuary Network status. I have a friend who has a small yard in Charlottesville, Virginia, and her small yard right in town is a native plant sanctuary because she's gone to great efforts to cultivate only native plants on her yard, and she gives little neighborhood walks through her garden, and so she qualifies. So And it doesn't even have to just be, someone's house with a big plot of land. It can be a community walking trail. So a community can come together and gain sanctuary status from United Plant Savers, or a neighborhood, for example, like a public park or a school. So there's lots of ways to be involved without owning a big plot of land. I know that for a long time I was a dreamer because I didn't have land and I was a renter for all my life. And so I recognize the privileges of people who have land and opportunity to work on these projects. And it's a huge blessing in my life to have a piece of land to steward. This is because it was such a huge a blessing to come to be able to buy a piece of land. I made that promise that I was going to steward and protect the land as part of my life values. They also want to see that you are providing additional details just about why you want to be part of the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary Network. So I'll talk about that too. Early on, when I was a dreamer, I had taken this app called Trello. Those of you who work in organizations and group settings or work remote might recognize the Trello board. But basically, I use the Trello board, which is almost like a list-making bulletin board. I created a Trello board for Botanical Sanctuary where I separated my, let's see if I can get my pen here. I separated my columns into the different questions where I broke things down. And that way I could start to collect my information over, the first year that I was here. Because when I first landed here, I didn't like jump into applying. It took me some time, and I wanted to do it consciously, slowly, and thoughtfully. Especially with learning my landscape and knowing what needed to be done and taking inventory and things like that. So I found Trello board to be a really organized way of gathering all my materials for my application, including my maps and some photos and some lists and things like that. So anyone here this is a public board. I'm not sure exactly how you would find it on Trello, but if you just email me, there's contact information at the end. I'll share my Trello board with you, and then you can take it and make it your own. For those of you who work with Trello, so that would be a fun thing to do. But some people like to put it all in a file folder, and that's fine, or on a computer Dropbox folder, or just in one document. So this is just one tip that I had. So when I break it down to please provide details of land, location, maps, photos, time on land as part of application part 1, I took a close look at the details of my land, location, and photos and things like that. And I, could put together a narrative, basically. One of my healing herbalism, indigenous teachers from Ecuador has always taught me that the first step in becoming an herbal healer is knowing your landscape. So I really took time when I landed here in Polk County. I came from Asheville, by the way, to really get to know the landscape through the seasons, especially walking around and it's really crazy because I've been an herbalist for over 27 years, and it astounds me that every time I walk out the door, I identify a new to me plant, and it's just really mind blowing. So at this point, I've identified about 120 native plants on the property. And there's a lot of plants I haven't even ID'd yet. Like there's a bunch of trees and shrubs, and that's just when I have time to really sit with them and ID them, get to know them, and then I start adding them to my inventory. So I live in Polk County. I live right there at the crevice, or right there in the middle. I live right here. of the middle of the mountains and the Piedmont. So that's what we call the foothills. So we have lots of, I wanted to describe that on my application. Obviously, I think one thing that people don't consider is that just because a plant is native to North Carolina doesn't mean it's native to your county. And I'm not saying that you have to be a purist, because, we get this a lot with like Echinacea purpurea, where you see it grown, you see gardeners and native plant enthusiasts grow it across the state. When in reality, if you really did a deep dive, you would find that it's only really been found in indigenous stands in very small areas of the foothills and mountain regions, including Polk County is one of those areas. And so yet we still apply it as a native plant in North Carolina. So you see people in the coastal and the Piedmont growing it as a native plant, but that's fine. When it comes to native plants, there's some people that are going to be so rigorous and determined, and there's some people who are more lax, and there's some people that don't care. So, you find your niche, it's fine. I'm kind of like, try to be county specific, but, I'm growing, for instance, stone root, which technically is not native to my county. It's native to the mountains, but we have another type of world horse balm that looks like stone root that grows endemic to my county, but I haven't been able to get it onto my land yet. And so, it's just, I'm not going to get rid of my stone root, my Collinsonia canadensis, because it's so beautiful. And it's a native plant of North Carolina in the mountains. So I'm going to let it be. You can be as like specific or as general as you want. And when it comes to United Plant Savers, they just want to make sure that there's people out there looking after medicinal plants. So yes, please grow echinacea, please grow bloodroot, and please grow trillium and some of these wonderful medicinal plants that are often at risk due to over harvesting. They don't care what county you're in. They're not going to check you for any of that. And so our sanctuary here is called the Ponderland Native Plant Sanctuary. We have gardens here for food and flowers. And we also have a lot of attention to native plants here. When I landed here, I did a lot of blessing work with acknowledging that this land is a heritage of the Cherokee folks, and I even had a Cherokee healer come down and offer a blessing for the land. But I also want to, give loving and to acknowledgement to everyone who stewarded this piece of land throughout time. And also, I think about the future and everyone. Obviously, this is deep, deep feeling for me. And I'm also recovering from surgery, so I'm a little fragile. But this is like so meaningful to me, but also to think about the sake of the future generations of people who will look after this tiny piece of land. So it's meaningful to me. And so my family's been here since October 2020, and we are considered this piece of land sacred, and like we took our task of stewardship very seriously. Why native plants? Native plants to preserve the habitat and the animals and the critters and the pollinators that are indigenous to our area, to prevent the takeover of invasive pests and invasive animals and invasive plants. Although I'm not trying to belittle invasive plants. They also have a use, and medicinal uses and ornamental uses and things like that. And there's no shortage of invasive plants on my property either, which I'll share with you in a little bit. And so knowing your landscape, I was really, really excited to find a research paper through Conserving Carolina about the biodiversity of Polk County. So y'all might do a project to see if you can find if there's been any inventory taken in Union County. that would be a great thumbnail of a place to start to learn about your landscape. And so I use a lot of language from this paper in my application, basically just letting United Plant Savers know that there's like low mountain pine forest, mesic, mixed hardwood forest, alluvial forest. And so, wanted to have like some kind of researched information about the landscape here. And here's an aerial photo of the land, which includes the pond, which is hence the ponderland, and includes all this like meadow area over here, which was a mowed pasture for horses. If you know anything about Polk County, you are, it's horse country, right? And so we also have about an acre and a half of woods, which is so rich with native plants. It's ridiculous. It's just like this little gem of rich herbs. And it helps that on this side and this side and this side, there's 3 landowners, each of them having about plus 40 acres each on each side. So that really helps, kind of keep us in this protected pocket. But there's always things that happen, like this neighbor up here just like cut down like 20 acres of forest, almost adjoining our land. So that has repercussions on like the water flow and the sediment and things like that we have to keep an eye on. There's nothing we can do because that's their land. And so yeah, and in addition to that, I'm going to skip to what makes your land special. So in this narrative, I thought to share a few little identifiers of what makes the land special here. And so as I'm going through this, I'd love for you to like consider what makes your land special, or the piece of property that you're most fond of or connected to. Even if you are renting, just kind of go through like this little what if exercise. And so I said, well, there's wetlands. The whole pond area and front yard is a wetland for overflow, for flooding. It's a floodplain. There's a ridgeline meadow. There's a creek that runs through the woods. There's a bigger stream that drains into. There's lower woods, which are somewhat mesic and dry. And then there's upper pine forest, which is completely different than the lower woods. So, so yeah, lots of kind of micro habitats within the 4 acres that I thought is kind of neat, how like some plants will grow in the lower woods, but not in the upper woods. And obviously some plants will grow near the pond, but not grow up on in the pasture. So so a lot to consider in terms of like, what are the identifying features of your property? And so this is up from the ridge, kind of looking down at, if you see, go downhill, there's a pond. And then all this leading up here is a floodplain, and the stream is right here where everything drains, and the creek is over here. So, and obviously you can see all these invasive plants here, mostly honeysuckle, and we do keep it mowed for the most part because once you let it go, it's impossible to get through here. We have started some patches of letting it go to try to foster some milkweed stands, and there's also a lot of like blueberry bushes up on the top, and prickly pear cactus stands, and persimmon trees, and so lots of different native shrubs and things on the meadow. And I dream of the day where we can turn this into a native plant meadow. That would be awesome, but that's also quite an endeavor. I've only been here 3 years, so there's things to consider, like what to do with this. For now, we just maintain it, cut and taken care of. There's my prickly pear stand. It's interesting that prickly pear cactus, eastern prickly pear cactus, is a native plant of North Carolina. And here's a native plant stand. It's probably about 2 times bigger now than when I took this picture because it keeps spreading. And I see nothing wrong with that. I teach another class on how to use prickly pear. And it's like so much fun, just how to eat it, how to juice it, how to make wine with it, how to cook with the fruit, how to harvest it. So those, I've had so much fun, so many adventures with the prickly pear. And so the creek side is something, originally when we came in, this whole creek side of the property was just inundated with Japanese honeysuckle. And we've cleared a lot of that. For a majority feature here that was already here when I got here was the cohosh cove. It is rich with tons of black cohosh. Which is one of the things when I saw, I was like, oh, we need to put an offer on this house because they have all this rich native medicinal herbs here in the woods. And so this is in the fall, but we were creating trails. This is kind of the trail uphill to like where you get up here to the pine, the more of the pine forest. Was like totally different vegetation than lower down here. And so up on the dry piney ridge, we have things like muscadine grapes and these trilliums that are so beautiful. And then we have the pond, and this is how the pond looked when we were just moving in. One of the things I've done with the pond is rewild the edges of the pond. And that's a cautious thing to do because it's a small pond. And it's also a man-made pond, right? To retain and sift water. So so we got to be cautious not to break the seal with deep rooting plants or shrubs. And then but also like let it like not mow it all the way to the edge. And so when I started not mowing all the way to the edge, we have so many native plants around the pond edge. It's just ridiculous. It's just so beautiful. And I should have some pictures of these in a little bit. Here's the floodplain, what I was telling you about the floodplain. This only happens a couple times a year. But it's something to consider when you're planting. So floodplain plants, we installed a whole like a hedge of elderberry, native elderberry. We also installed several pawpaw trees because they do fine with flooding. And there's like redbud trees and tulip poplars out here. So when it comes to existing medicinal plant species, that definitely took its time. So this is the part of taking inventory, and I'm still doing that. I'm still taking inventory, and so what I did here is I started this inventory on a really wonderful software or really wonderful website called plantsmap.com. And I invested so much time into this project on plantsmap.com. And it was so cool. It was like you could upload photos, you could map your plants about where you found them, you could take notes from year to year, you can order labels and little signs for them through their like data. And I had already input over 100 plants over the last couple years. And lo and behold, their website crashed and they lost all our data. And so I had to start fresh. I was so upset. And they're still promising us that we'll get our data back at some time, but it doesn't seem likely. The good thing is that it did happen right after my application was submitted. So so when it came to listing a plant inventory, I basically just sent them this link and said, look through my plant sanctuary inventory. So now I'm working with iNaturalist. You're probably familiar with iNaturalist because you can create projects on iNaturalist. And so I have a Ponderland Native Plant Sanctuary iNaturalist project. And so it's taking time because I have a book coming out. For those of you who don't know, the National Geographic Herbal is coming out in November. And so that's kept me a little busy. But when I have time, I start mapping things on iNaturalist. And I just want to map them as I see things. So I don't want to like kind of copy my old list and just put it all in like data entry. I want to like rediscover everything again and map it on iNaturalist. iNaturalist is very reliable because it's like an international network and includes like academia and organizations and all kinds of things. So if you haven't become familiar with iNaturalist, I would look into that. It's you can like really catalog your plants. You can pre-order the book on Amazon. You just type it in, or National Geographic Herbal. Also, my website is the Ponderland, all one word. And on the Ponderland website, you can find a description of the book with a link to pre-order. And you can also see some of the work we're doing on the plant sanctuary, and learn more about my work and my fiance's work. So this is what the plants map look like. And this also, honestly is similar to what iNaturalist looks like. So, if this was the actual web page, I could scroll through my 120 plants and click on one of those thumbnails and it opens up and I can map it if you want to. Like some people don't like to map the specific coordinates because, you want to protect your privacy a little bit. But on iNaturalist, when you map things like ginseng or golden seal, it automatically obscures the location because it doesn't want people to know the location. So I think that's kind of cool. But the other thing about iNaturalist too is you have peers also reviewing your botanical identification so that you have like some kind of validation of your ID. And then you're also supposed to participate in validating other people's ID. So they expect you to kind of participate in your community. So I often will participate in Polk County iNaturalist entries just to, I want to see like what's out there. What are people seeing these days? What kind of flowers are out there? But there's also, like I encourage my fiance, he's more of the critter person. He's always finding snakes and frogs and toads and just all kinds of little critters out, the bugs and all kinds of things. So I'm like, you should start an iNaturalist for bugs or of the Ponderland. But so it's cool. You can see like bats and whatever's in your region, you can look it up on iNaturalist. So basically Plants Map said that they're going to start a relationship with this other app called Plant Soon, the digital passport for trees and plants. This is a European company. And supposedly they're going to take Plants Map data and like convert some of our accounts if we want to go into that. I looked at it and it seemed, maybe, I don't know. I'm kind of feeling more secure with iNaturalist. But I can see if someone had like a legit botanical gardens, like a museum or like, something like that, they might, invest, they might put their project on Plant Soon. So I haven't played with this, but that's another one to look at. I just love the idea of like mapping your inventory. It's so cool. And then when you do have people, you give tours, you can give them like a little digital tour if you want, And so, yeah, here's my iNaturalist banner. At the time when I made this this presentation slide, I had submitted 25 observations. I haven't. I'm probably up to like 35 now. Like I said, it's taking time because I've got a lot of things in the burner, but I'm not in a super huge hurry, especially that I've already been approved as a sanctuary. And I know there's over 120 plants here, native plants. So I'm just kind of easing through the year again. But that was a huge loss. That Plants Map really broke my heart, honestly. And so these are some of the existing plant species. And then, you know, on iNaturalist, you can also say things like this is a plant under cultivation versus this is a wild plant. So I think that's always kind of cool because you can then track of like even if you look at your peers in the same county, you're like, wow, how did they get that plant thriving in their area, which is a mile from me, and I don't have any of that. And then you find, oh, they're cultivating it. Okay, that makes sense. So it's just kind of little like you can discern if you're cultivating or if you're finding them wild. And so I think that's kind of neat. And so on my application, I didn't, aside from sending them a link to the 120 thumbnail plants, I did just simply outline in writing the actual plants from the at-risk list or the from the United Plant Savers at-risk plant list. So at the time, there were 20 on my property, so I listed these out for them. There's now like 3 or 4 more that I've either found or put in. So yeah, I think, you know, if you really just harness in on what their plants are and what you're protecting, and then they want to know about your current conservation projects. And here we have things like invasive plant control, pollinator gardens, woodland restoration, wetlands and pond restoration. And so this is a picture from Polk County. I was just driving at a stop sign one day and I was like, whoa, this is Polk County in a nutshell. We are in kudzu country here. There's kudzu everywhere, but you see tree of heaven, English ivy, Japanese honeysuckle, the princess tree. You know, there's like so much to take in just this one photo, which is very representative of what it might look like in unkept areas around here, which is why it's so important to take care of your native property, native stands on your property, because otherwise it can resort to looking like this, which can be pretty for some people. But this is a, you know, kudzu, for example, is the plant that ate the South. I don't want it to eat my property. This is the woods when I first got here. So I moved here in the fall and I didn't know what I was in for until things started coming out in the spring. And in the spring, I'm like, what is all this? This is basically almost the whole forest floor was covered in invasive honeysuckle. And it was like a ground cover. And so one of the projects immediately was just rolling up the honeysuckle, which was really fun actually, because it let me like just sit on the ground and get my hands dirty. My hands have probably touched every foot of the wood floor that we've eradicated. And so you like pull these little plugs out and you can see that's like the cross section of many highways of vine that's along the forest ground. And then like I pull them up and it's like all these ropes and you just keep going and going. This was the majority of the woodland floor when I got here. And I spent hours and hours and hours just, and you know, I also had friends and volunteers here and there come and help pulling Japanese honeysuckle and then burning it. And so I really love this meme I read on a Facebook page. It says, I've seen the best minds of my generation starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves down the wooded path at dawn, tearing at the Lonicera. I just thought that was hilarious. That was me. So when I started pulling the Japanese honeysuckle, I saw lots of plants either trying to survive underneath it or like thriving after I removed it. And one of those was this ground cover called Green and Golds. Really great. If you ever have like a shady area and you don't know what to grow, or like a barren patch under a tree, or you know, near, you know, like you want some like nice, pretty ground cover, Green and Golds is one thing to consider. Like I have moved some to different areas under trees or even in landscaping in the front yard, and it just keeps spreading and spreading. So I keep like plucking some and moving it around to different patches. Such a great native ground cover. I'm really in love with it. And so after removing the honeysuckle, I see all these like May apples thriving, this like wood anemones and that's the anemone, the mayapple, the yellow root, those are the flowers. This robin's plantain, lots of native plants thriving, like spice bush and turtle head, all coming in. This spice bush actually was being choked out by by the honeysuckle, is like twining up and suffocating it. So it's good to see like things thriving, like a bunch of bloodroot that was like getting squashed underneath that honeysuckle, and a variety of lots of ferns around here. Privet is another one that I've been pulling out every time I walk through the woods. I'm pulling these things out. These are like little privet seedlings, and just like never ending. And we've got this polar bear tool to pull out actual like thick stemmed privets that are maybe a little taller than us. Privet can turn into a big tree where it's impossible to pull out with your hands. So we're trying to get it before it turns into trees, but there's several shrubs around the property because it spreads like crazy and it just wants to take over. So that's one of our projects. And then we have this tree of heaven that is really hard to eradicate because you don't want to ever cut it down, because if you cut it down, it'll send up shoots everywhere. So there's different ways to deal with it. It might need a herbicide, and even for those of us who are most organically inclined to pack the stem with an herbicide after kind of brush the stem. You wouldn't like spray it or pour it on there. You just would cut a piece of it. I actually haven't attempted this yet because I'm doing some research still. Mimosa, another invasive. And, believe it or not, I was taking a walk by the creek one day and I looked down. I was like, what the heck? This is a little sprout of kudzu. And it was already like 4 feet long and I had never seen it. And, as far as I know, this property's kudzu free, but you always got to be careful because those birds are flying over, dropping seeds. And there's the little kudzu root that I just boiled and drank the decoction. So if you're interested in native plants, and probably many of you are part of this Facebook group called NC Native Plant Forum. It's so good. Like I've learned so much on this group. I have found it to be so supportive, and they're pretty like thorough, because I'm also part of like Maryland, Virginia, and South Carolina and Georgia, and they're more lax, I would say. But the NC native plant people are pretty thorough. So I've learned so much on this group about so many things relating to native plants. There's also the NC Native Plant Society. You can get a native plant garden certification, where if you have a garden, that where you're tending to native plants, you can have that certified and get your signage up as something that you're, stewarding. So that's kind of cool. I might look at that at some point. And the pollinator garden is another project we have going on here. And for that, I look to the Butterfly Highway. The North Carolina Wildlife Federation has seeds that are specific to your area that are native for pollinators. And so we started we joined and we got the seeds and the sign and started a native plant kind of little highway along our driveway. And so, this was last year. This year, more came in because sometimes it takes a year or two for these seeds to go through the frost and get stratified and all that before they actually start to thrive. So I'm really happy that they're coming in really nicely. We're starting to see pollinators along our little strip of highway. And we did see a monarch butterfly too. One time we were walking through the woods. No, I want to show you this because I know we're running out of time. Okay, this right here, a zebra swallowtail butterfly. they fly by our porch all the time. And we were like, what the heck? And you know, when we look into them, we're like, their larvae, their caterpillars feed on pawpaw. And at the time, we didn't know there was pawpaw in the area. I mean, you assume there is, right? But when the butterfly comes, you know there is. It's like, where is the pawpaw? So we went for a walk in the deep woods on neighboring properties with permission, and we found hundreds of pawpaw in the woods. This is my fiance, hundreds, non-fruiting because they're too shady and they're probably all clonal. But we ended up, and then when we walked back onto our property, we saw a few little stands of pawpaw on our property. Not non-fruiting. We decided you have to have different like varieties of different families of pawpaw to be able to cross-pollinate and make fruit, and probably a little more sunshine than you would get in the woods. So we're putting them slowly but surely in the floodplain to see if we can ever get some fruits. But that's kind of a fun project. And let me go back then. Just beautiful plants. That's a milkweed that's growing in the butterfly highway. This is like my favorite native plant that I have found wild on the property, and this is the red ring milkweed. It's just so gorgeous, and it's another food for the monarch. And so this one I check in on every year, and it's just so special. We also have the butterfly milkweed, or the Asclepias tuberosa. And we have passion flower growing in the meadow, which is also native to the area. The scarlet bee balm and the other bee balm, the bergamot bee balm, very beautiful. And yeah, these are little tiny pawpaws. They're growing. They're growing. They're about hip height now. And so we also woodland restoration. So when I found that research paper that I talked about in the beginning, it went so far as identifying plants of different areas of the county. And I live in Mill Spring, and that paper from the Conserving Carolina talked about rare plants in Mill Spring. So I thought, this is where I'm looking for. This is where I'm really focused. So scentless mock orange, this is the baby I planted. It's probably about 4 times as big now. Golden seal, we put in a bunch of root pieces, which are in their 3rd year. American ginseng, we just threw seeds everywhere, like 1,000 seeds. The Betsy Trillium, we put in a bunch of rootstock this year, so I don't know how it's going to come in next year. And I am looking for world horse balm in my neighborhood, and I found someone on iNaturalist who found it wild on their property, so I'm going to look and see if they have it, if there's enough in their stand to try to propagate something from their stand. And so trying to like slowly put in some of these plants that I haven't seen on the property, but I know they're like rare in Mill Spring, but native to this area. So and this Allegheny spurge is actually endemic to Polk County, so I'd be interested in checking that out at some point. So, you know, part of the lifestyle now is visiting these native plant cells and having little test plots of seeds and starters. We tried to put in a bunch of ramps and they never came in. I just think it's too dry here. But we've got trilliums and we've got little baby ginseng coming in. Nothing worth poaching, so don't get excited. They're just like little babies, and who knows how they'll do. Golden seal coming in, nice and cute and little still. And then this is blue houndstone. We have a lot of this wild on the property. It's just so pretty, and I just met it moving here. Yep, the ramps patch didn't work, but you can tell. Look at this soil; it's kind of dry and acidic down at the bottom. A little sandy and silty around the creek, so it's not that rich black soil you would think of when you go deep cove. But we tried. But we did. So when I got the ramps, my contact in West Virginia who sent me the ramps, her name's Laura Quisenberry. She's an old timer, Appalachia, West Virginia lady, and she salvages ramps from where they're going to build or construct. And she told me to plant blue cohosh because they provide a nursery for ramps. So I also planted blue cohosh, and those are doing pretty good. So so that's been fun. These little dwarf crusted irises. This is kind of a funny story because I gave my son a baggie of these bare roots. Probably had like 12 bare roots in it. And I told him, walk around the property and wherever you feel called to, wherever you feel like it's going to do well, go and plug them into the ground, like a couple inches deep, and then walk around and plug it there, like just kind of use your intuition to where would you think that this would do well. So then like the next summer, I'm walking on the trail, walking up the hill, and I look to my left and there's literally 12 dwarf crested irises all in one little tiny patch on the side of the trail. So my guess is he just went up there and plugged them all in one spot and called it a day. But that's teenagers for you. Yeah, this is Louse Sport. This is that world horse bomb that I'm looking for. All right. Yep, and the pond restoration. It's like be careful what you wish for, because if I showed you a picture of this pond today, it's half taken over with cattails. And we didn't plant any cattails. And when the cattails first came in, I was excited because they're native plants, but then they wanted to own the whole pond. So now we have a huge issue of cattails that we're working on. And we actually are confronting right now pond renovation because one of the draining tubes sprung a leak in it. But around the pond, we now have like native St. John's wort and cardinal flower and just so many beautiful plants that grow along the pond now. That's the cardinal flower and the leer leaf sage and the sand rush and goldenrod and golden ragwort and bone set. So it's just amazing. This miniature little tiny St. John's wort. And there's the cattails. This is still, they've moved. They're really taking over. So we've experimented a little with pulling some out, and it's not a fun thing. But they're edible, right? There's lots of useful parts of the cattail. Yeah. And this is the elderberry hedge in the floodplain. And now a couple of years later, it's like a huge elderberry hedge with lots of medicine. Like, I think it's so important to plant elderberry if you're into herbs, because every winter, especially with viral things floating around, it seems like every winter all the companies run out of elderberries and you can't get them, or they get so expensive. So I'm like, I'm just going to plant my own. And they're very heavy with berries now, so I can go out and make my own elderberry syrup. Yeah. And I know our time is coming to an end, but I'll just breeze through a couple more of these topics if you don't mind. I'm not going to go over too much, but basically educational programs, because a lot of people, I'm an educator, so this part is kind of easy for me. But for other people, this stumps people, and they feel like they can't move forward because they don't do education. And so I was like, I've never had a plant walk here. I've never brought a class here on the property. I'm just not ready for that. So I would say you can write an article for your local paper. You can do a presentation for a garden club like this. You can maybe make a Facebook album on your social media to tell people about different plants that you're seeing on your property or projects that you're doing on your property. So there's lots of different ways to be educating from your land without feeling like you have to have formal education and infrastructure for that kind of thing. So, and then part 3 was kind of more from the heart. It's like, why would you want to be a part of the Botanical Sanctuary Network? And for me, it was to inspire others to protect this little piece of land. I was inspired by my friend and her little lawn sanctuary, because it gives me a good cause to work toward, because I promised God when I got this land, and because I love native plants and I'm grateful for the stewards. So, and the dream continues. I've got all these dreams of dream projects in mind, and it takes time. We really need help. We're at the point where we need volunteers. I'm thinking about maybe getting a couple apprentices next summer, especially now that we are a formal plant sanctuary. We actually started at Etsy, and we're going to be selling like seeds and little plant starters and things like that, just to offset the expense of our labor and the investment that we do when we put efforts into the land. So we're going to try to see if we can even sell like herbal products from some of the cultivated native plants on the property. So yeah, I guess we got through it in an hour. I was talking kind of fast, but I'm here if there's any questions. I'm just, honestly, I hope that I inspired someone to think about considering, native plant sanctuary on your property or property that you're affiliated with, or even like learning something about native plants. This right here is a poke flower, growing right out of my garden bed, but I left it because it's so beautiful. I'm here for any questions or any comments.
We had a question about how you were getting rid of the honeysuckle, and almost immediately you talked about how you got rid of the honeysuckle. So that was perfect timing.
So with the honeysuckle, like most of it, I can like pull out of the ground with my hands if it's not too established. So a lot of it, I was lucky, was shallow, and then you keep pulling and you keep it's like rolling up mats of carpet. And then you get to the mother plants and you're like, oh, this is where it came from. And those are giant, like bark stemmed, vines growing up trees. And those you need to either pull them with a puller bear, or even in extreme cases, chop them off at the close to the ground and brush them with some kind of herbicide, is what's recommended by universities and extensions in many cases. Now there's along the fence line, the property boundaries, I know there's honeysuckle shrubs that I'll probably never get to. They're just gonna kind of live their merry life there. I'm more focused on the woods. So you have to kind of be discerning of where your energy is gonna go. And then another important thing too is like personal boundaries. When I walk through the woods, like it used to be, like I couldn't even go for a nice little stroll through the land without ending up on my hands and knees pulling honeysuckle or privet.
I understand.
So now sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna walk for pleasure and not like get too crazy, It's just like this takes time and I can't ever get to it all. So I need to remember that, sometimes it's just nice and peaceful to walk without worrying about these things.
It's hard to do though. I understand completely.
It's been a big.
I have also found that because you can identify the Japanese honeysuckle early in late in the winter. when
Yes.
there's not much else out, and there's not much else to pull at that point.
Yes.
So, and the weather's great. So that's a good time to start it. And we're
Great
usually
advice.
really wet around here, so it kind of pulls up pretty easy too.
Absolutely. After a rainy day or two, that's the best time because it comes out more loosely. And you're exactly right. Before all the other vegetation comes in, so like late winter, early spring is really ideal for here at least.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone? You can unmute yourself and just ask it directly if you like.
I just want to thank you for the idea, because Tree of Heaven is coming all over my flower beds. And you said you can just brush the herbicide on the leaves and just kind of bag it.
So, Tree of Heaven, you want to do your research because I've never actually done this yet, but I'm learning. And so if it's just like little,
They are
It's
not
hard to say.
little and they are stubborn.
okay. So In that case, the thing they say is that if you try to pull it, the thing is that inevitably little pieces get stuck in the ground, and that's just going to prompt them to spread more from
Oh.
underground. So you don't want to just pull it. And so what I've been told is it's kind of like you take a hatch of like an axe or something, you like make like a deep crack into the side of it, like maybe a foot or 2 foot high, and then you stuff that with herbicide, and then let it kind of die from the inside, and then later go through and it'll just die. So I haven't done it. I really want to be careful because the last thing I want to do is pull it and it'll spread more. And I think that's kind of because people are like, oh, pull it, or just chop it down. Because when you chop it down, the roots are still in the ground and it's going to spread more and send up more shoots. So it ends up being kind of, something that's harder to catch up with. So if someone here might know the name of that method, it's like you slash and stuff, or it's like some real catchy name like that about the best way to do it. But your county extension should know. And so some university resources also are, this is what they're saying.
So the idea of cutting it completely back and then painting it is not a great idea because that just makes it spread more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you're
They don't cut it.
hurting it and then
Yes.
trying to kill it.
You're invigorating it from the underground up. And so they say don't cut it all the way back. You just like make a deep crevice in the side of it and stuff that with some kind of herbicide.
Yeah, this is Debbie. I'm the horticulture extension agent. And that's called hack and squirt.
Yes. It's like slash and burn, hash and what?
Right. So basically what you're doing is you're opening up that vascular system. And when you put the herbicide then in the cut, it's usually a systemic that's sucked down in the roots and it kills it from the roots up.
Can you repeat what it's called? The slash and
Hack and squirt.
hack and squirt. Okay, I'm writing that down because
That is
always like I know it has some cute like catchy name,
Yeah.
but I never get it
very
right.
academic, that name.
Hack and squirt.
Exactly.
None of us will ever forget it.
I'll let you guys know how it works out.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, I think they know how to get in touch with you, Mimi. There's your email address so that you may get some questions as people go wander around in their yard and wonder what they're going to do with it. 'Cause you're going to see your yard, your woods or whatever a little differently now, I think, with different eyes. So that's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for all
Oh,
of
it's
this
my
information.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.